Everyone, and welcome to KIPP DC's Engaging on the Issues series, looking ahead with KIPP DC's new president. My name is Kristen Jackson, Director of Development, and excited to connect with all of you today. Our Engage on the Issue series is an opportunity for us to connect with supporters, and today the chance to hear from our new president, Shannon Hodge, on her professional journey and her hopes for the future of KIPP DC. Before we hear from our speakers today, I just want to remind you all that you are automatically muted and off video, and we highly encourage you to put some questions or comments in the Q&A box. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Advancement Officer Tom Clark to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Kristen. Good morning, everyone. It's so great to have you all on today and excited to see some names of great friends and new and old in the attendee list today. So we're really glad to have you all join us. We are thrilled to, at long last, welcome our new president at KIPP DC Public Schools, Shannon Hodge, who has been with us sort of on an interim basis, a rolling basis for the past couple of months, and is finally now with us full time. And over the past few months has joined us in a series of conversations across all of our different campuses to meet with a lot of our internal stakeholders about what they're hearing, what they're experiencing, what life is like at KIPP DC. And now also we're excited to bring this opportunity to you all so that you can get a chance to meet her as well. So we are really excited about the conversation today that we're going to have between Shannon and Barry. To quickly introduce Barry as well, Barry has had a long career as a senior leader at Waste Management, where he was the head of Vice President of Corporate Affairs and the Chief People Officer. And now provides strategic consulting services in energy and education, and has recently, as we were just talking about, flexed some new muscles as a winemaker based out of Argentina. So his first shipment of wine is expected in DC soon. Barry, we will send you the guest list for your first tasting party. We will all be there to join, and I will see you in Mendoza sometime this spring for a site visit to make sure everything's running smoothly and operations are up and running. But Barry also, outside of sort of his professional career and experience, sits on the KIPP DC Board of Directors. He is our vice chair and is the chair of our School and Community Affairs Committee. Barry's also on the board of Washington Latin Public Charter School, the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia, and the board of our great friends at City Bridge Education. So we're excited to have Barry here to help us moderate this conversation today. And like I said, Shannon has just recently joined KIPP DC as our new president. For the past few years, she has served as the founding executive director of the DC Charter School Alliance, where she was responsible for coordinating education leaders from across the city to advocate for resources, policies, and systems to improve DC schools. And prior to this experience, Shannon served as the co-founder and executive director of Kingsman Academy Public Charter School, which is a middle and high school that's designed specifically to meet the needs of at-risk students in the District of Columbia. And before that, she was an attorney and a guidance counselor. And comes with a great deal of experience and perspective. So we're very excited to have her and officially welcome her to KIPP DC. So just as a reminder, like Kristen said, if you have any questions during this conversation, feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we'll try to get them into the conversation. But you all want to hear directly from Barry and Shannon, so I will kick it over to you, Barry, to kick off the conversation.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. Yeah, I was a garbage man that's gotten into wine. It's been a lot of fun. Hey, Shannon, how the heck are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I cannot complain. Let's just have a conversation. This is all about you.
Let's do it.
And so we're going to focus a lot about you because we're really excited that you are on the KIPP team. And let's figure out why we're so excited. Let's just start sort of in the beginning. Who is Shannon Hodge? I mean, are you a Washingtonian? Were you a public school kid? Siblings? If you're not from Washington, where are you from? Just who is Shannon Hodge?
Absolutely. I am an only child. My parents are from Southern Georgia and Northern Florida. I grew up outside of Richmond, Virginia, which I tell people is the real Virginia, not whatever is happening in Northern Virginia here. My dad is one of 20 children. My mom is one of 7. And I am an only, so large family, but small immediate family. I attended public schools in Henrico County, Virginia, from the time I was in kindergarten until I was graduated from high school. And for me, as I look back, I realized that my parents were exercising the form of school choice that was available to them. which was they picked the house that they moved into when I was 6 years old based on which high school I would go to. Henrico County has a wide range of schools and neighborhoods and opportunities for housing. And my parents, in looking at our first home, decided that what was most important was, one, could they pay for it? But two, what school system and what schools would I be going to? And so they picked our first house based on the high school I would go to.
How about that? And then you found your way up to New England?
Yes, so that is a super long story. I will give you the short version of it, which
Okay.
is neither one of my parents had graduated from college when I was looking at my own college opportunities, and schools started reaching out to me, and schools that I had never even considered or thought of as possibilities for me. And one of those was Harvard. And my dad says, I do not remember this, but he says, once I got in, I told them I didn't care if they had to get a second mortgage on the house, that I was going to Harvard. I don't even know why I knew what a second mortgage was as a teenager, but apparently whatever I said was convincing enough. So I was able to spend 4 amazing years at Harvard College.
How about that? So how did you get to Washington?
So that is the even longer story, which I will give the definite shortcut from. I initially, when I was in college, thought that I was going to be a teacher. I did the undergraduate teacher education program. I was certified to teach high school social studies and felt like I wasn't ready. I felt like there was more that I needed to learn to show up the way that I wanted to show up in a classroom. And so I went to Indiana to learn how to be a guidance counselor, not because I wanted to be a guidance counselor, but I thought that that would really help me understand students from a better perspective than what I had been trained on to date. That led to me being actually a guidance counselor and a guidance director for a few years in a small town in Indiana. The policy decisions that were affecting my students were tremendous. And I felt like I wasn't equipped enough to make the difference that I wanted to make. And I couldn't decide between learning more about policy or learning more about the law. I ultimately ended up doing both. My studies in policy took me back to Cambridge. My studies in the law took me to Stanford. And eventually the law brought me back to DC. I think that I was always going to end up in DC. It is what I consider to be the closest big city to home. And so I wanted to be closer to my parents. California was not going to work for them. But also DC just provided this amazing opportunity to be in a city where there is mayoral control of schools, where you can have or make a real difference and see real change. When I first came to DC, I came as an attorney, as an education attorney, representing schools and universities largely. I did a little bit of stuff on the side, but that was the vast majority of the work that I did. And I almost immediately got involved in local issues in DC, working with the DC Council, doing some things with the charter school in DC, and I got hooked. So here I am.
So I want to dig down more in this interest on education. You leave Cambridge, you end up in Indiana. You're a Hoosier for a little bit. And is it because that was just your first gig and you liked it and you stuck with it? Or was there something else inside of Shannon Hodge said that education is where I really want to play?
That has always been it for me. And I will tell you, when I told my mom that I was leaving my law firm job to go into working for a school, she said she knew it. She knew that that's what I was going to do, that I belonged in schools and working with schools. I told you a little bit about my extended family. And what I didn't say was that for my family, really, education has been made a tremendous difference. My grandfather was born in 1883. His parents were born into slavery. And of my 4 grandparents, only one was literate. As I think about what my family and my cousins and I have been able to do in just a couple of generations, almost all of that is about the opportunities that education provided for us. And for me, it's always been part of my personal mission and my personal work to make sure that as many people as possible have those same opportunities. It shouldn't require exceptionalism. It shouldn't require someone who's a nerd like I was to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. Every student in the city, in the district, should be able to have the opportunity to achieve their dreams through access to a quality education. And that has always been internal. That's always driven me. I think I've wanted to make sure that I understand it from various angles, from a teacher's angle, from a guidance counselor's angle, from a student's perspective, from a policymaker's perspective, from a lawyer's perspective, because I think all of those things matter in making sure that students have the opportunity to access a high quality education.
So this is in your DNA. This is
This is my DNA.
that's what I'm hearing. It's in
Basically.
your DNA.
Basically.
So you've had some founders roles in the space, and some executive director roles. Why not be the serial founder and go found something else? Why come to KIPP?
So I remember when I was thinking of coming to DC, people say, well, DC has more lawyers per capita than any city in the country. I don't know if that's true or not, but what I'm almost certain has to be true is that DC has more nonprofits than any city in the country, right? Like everyone wants to start something and do something new. And I totally get that. But I'm also a person who believes in joining established organizations and helping them grow and become even better. And the skill set that I bring can work in a founding situation. It can also work in an organization like KIPP DC, which has a tremendous track record and legacy of high quality and excellent schooling for students. And I can still bring skills to that. So I'm not someone who feels like I have to go out and start something. And in my own founding experiences, those have largely been about a specific need that was not being met. It wasn't about just kind of starting something for the sake of starting something, but really trying to meet a need that was out there.
So KIPP just happened to come along, or how did we get you?
Yeah, so I realized probably 15, 20 years ago that it didn't make sense for me to plan out my life. Because if I did that, then I would be missing opportunities that were never even on my radar. KIPP DC was never even on my radar. I was kind of plugging along in my role as the founding executive director of the DC Charter School Alliance, doing support for schools and advocacy on behalf of charter schools. And of course, knew of KIPP DC, was aware of the amazing work being done at KIPP DC, had KIPP DC on my board. And so I was very much aware, but never even envisioned or imagined that this could even be a possibility. But I think for me, it's important to leave myself open to potential opportunities and places where I can make a difference. And to be honest, enough people reached out to me to say, we think you should really consider this. And I was like, well, I'll give it a shot and see. And the more I learned, the more I was in and interested and just felt like this was the perfect fit for me.
Good. So how long have you been in the seat?
Since August 15th, but I started kind of rolling on a kind of gradually ramping up to full-time. So this is actually my first full-time week at KIPP DC. I've been part-time for about 3 months.
So the best thing about that answer from my vantage point is that you're not counting the days anymore.
I'm not counting.
I expected you to say, well, 97 days.
No.
I've kidded you on this before, but we've got a lot more witnesses now. Buyer's remorse?
No buyer's remorse at all. And I've had a number of people check on me in the last few weeks saying, how's it going? Are you okay? And my answer has been, so far, it's been everything I hoped and dreamed and needed for it to be. So no buyer's remorse.
So what's been your new leader? You're in a learning mode, no doubt. What's been your process to understand more about KIPP?
It's really just asking lots of questions and standing back and letting people answer and just listening to what people have to say. For me, it is a bit of a luxury to have this period of time where I can truly be in learning and listening mode. And Susan has been great about just giving me that space and opportunity to just stand back, to step back, and to just listen and learn. I'm coming out from outside of KIPP DC, so I need to understand the history, the culture, the impact, but I also need to understand what the people who are there every day, the students, the families, the staff, the teachers, what they hope, dream, what they find challenging, what they find exciting. And to be able to have the time and space to do that has been a tremendous opportunity.
So, like any job you've taken before this, I'm sure you did a fair amount of diligence. You had some awareness. My own personal view is that you're uniquely situated, having led the Charter Alliance and having other charters there and hearing things about KIPP and seeing KIPP from that vantage point. You ran a school where you got the same thing. So reputationally, what did you think about KIPP beforehand? What, if anything, has been validated or not disvalidated since you've been in these last few weeks?
Yeah, it's been very, very interesting to me how different I think what I've experienced inside of KIPP DC has been from what I thought KIPP DC was going to be. And when very early on, Jamie Dunham, the chief DEI officer, gave me kind of an intro to KIPP DC from her perspective. And I think it's one that she gives to new staff. And it's like, here are the different phases of the organization. I believe that many people outside of KIPP DC think that KIPP DC is the KIPP DC of 10, 8, 12 years ago. I think people have no idea of the tremendous work that's happening inside the organization on multiple fronts.
So wait, help me out for a minute. What was that?
Sure.
10 years
So
ago? Because I wasn't a part of it then.
Yeah, I think people still think that KIPP DC is a no excuses school. I think they think that KIPP DC is not interested in confronting its own DEI journey, that it's not interested in taking that journey. I think they think that KIPP DC is a place that's not welcoming of all students. I don't think people know that KIPP DC is a place of joyful learning. My very first morning, I started off in a pre-K3 classroom, and the excitement and enthusiasm that those students had for the learning that they were doing was amazing. It was infectious. Little kids can be scary sometimes with all the energy, but they were that energetic about learning. That was coming from the staff, that was coming from families who were prioritizing that for them, that was coming from what the structure and opportunities that KIPP DC provided for them. And I don't know that people outside of KIPP DC would ever have imagined that that was a KIPP DC classroom. And so I think one of the lessons that I've learned in these kind of first few months is that we have some work to do in helping people understand that is what makes KIPP DC tick. The other thing I will say too is that the amount of collaboration that happens throughout all levels of the organization is integral to its success. And I don't know that people outside the organization see that. I think they attribute a lot of KIPP DC's success to scale and size. And that's probably part of it, but a large part of it is also the culture inside the organization. And that is one of joy and collaboration that absolutely we have to lift up, because I see it when I go to schools. And I think people outside need to know it as well.
How about that? So you've been meeting with various groups, faculty, students, administrators, families, all of them? What are
some
those
of them.
like?
So far, the first thing we've done is prioritize getting out to all of the campuses to introduce me, and so that I can have a chance to connect with teachers and staff. And so hopefully we will have students and families in the next round. We're working on some scheduling and trying to see what that looks like now. But we focus first on teachers and staff, and that has been tremendous. What I tell them is that they're the ones who have the ideas. They're the ones who know what's working, what's not working. They have hopes and dreams. And so my first few months has been about hearing from them. And what I realized was that the way that we did it was amazing, and I want to do even more now. So sorry to the people who have to work my schedule now and get me out in all these places, but there's so many good ideas and so many personal stories of success and joy and professional growth and development that I think I would love to hear more about how we can extend that to even more people. So those have been tremendous. And of course, we've also heard about things that people want to see different. My big takeaway, I should say, when the pandemic started, I was running a school. Very shortly thereafter, I shifted into the DC Alliance, where I was doing support and advocacy. And now I'm back in a school, in a different type of school. And what I can say is that what people expected from their schools, their organizations before the pandemic is very, very different than what they want now. And I think we as an organization have to think about how do we continue to meet the needs of our students and be responsive to what teachers, staff, parents, families, everyone, what people want from KIPP DC now, because I think the pandemic has changed across the country what people want.
Have you been able to formulate any particular thoughts on how to effectuate that change, what it is, and at least at high level, based on what you've heard so far?
Yeah, so here's a wholly unsatisfactory answer is no, because it's too early. In part because I want to make sure that I'm hearing from a variety of voices. If I only went from what I heard from teachers and staff, I may end up with a set of recommendations that doesn't even address the needs of students and families. And so I want to be thoughtful and deliberative about that, but I can tell you a little bit about my process for getting there. And this is from kind of years of doing this work in various capacities and starting organizations and leading organizations. One is that we just have to listen to everybody. So we have to listen to our students. We have to listen to faculty. We have to listen to families. We have to listen to our partners who have their own expectations and understandings. And if I don't do that, and I don't do that in a deliberate, comprehensive way, then I may miss the mark. And so it doesn't feel great to say I'm 3 months in and I don't have a list of recommendations, but I want to stay true to my process, which involves hearing from people who really have a lot to contribute. The other thing I'll say is that I know at the end of this, end of my kind of learning and listening time, we'll have to figure out and make sure that we're doing the right things to focus on people and take care of people, right? The people make the system work, right? We have lots of tools that we can use. We have systems that we can use, but if the people aren't invested, if the people aren't there, then none of those things will matter. And so one of the lessons I've learned over my career is just making sure that we're focusing on people. And I've seen amazing ways that KIPP DC does that. And we're hearing even more recommendations from teachers and staff. And so I'm curious about other recommendations that may come. And then the last thing I'll say that's part of my process is just making sure that we as an organization, and particularly one that's been around as long as KIPP DC has been, continue to innovate and adapt to meet the needs of the people we serve, and that's our students. So when I was at Kingsman Academy, we opened Kingsman Academy because another school was closing, and that group of students really needed a place to go. Those were students who were at risk of dropping out because they were overage and undercredited, they had attendance and truancy issues, or they had emotional and behavioral challenges. So we very quickly applied for a charter to take over that school. We had 300, 400 pages of things that we just knew needed to happen. This is how we're going to serve this population well. Our first week of school, 57% of our high school students were overage and undercredited. We hadn't planned for that at all. And what we realized was that we had to rip up those 300, 400 pages of our plan and start over. And we started over by really talking to the students who showed up, not the ones who in our mind were going to show up, but the ones who were actually there. We talked to their families, we talked to teachers and staff, and we developed a whole new model to meet the needs. In many similar ways that KIPP DC opened up the Learning Center to meet the needs of the students who were in the network, we had to revamp based on the needs of the students who were there. And so I don't know what the outcome of my learning and listening time will be, but that's my process to get to recommendations that I think will actually help the organization and our students.
Cool. So organizationally, Susan Schaffler is the founder. She's the CEO. She's responsible for everything. She gets all the credit for the good stuff. She gets credit maybe for any of the bad stuff that happens. That's just the job. What does the president of KIPP DC do? What, at least that you understand is your remit right now? What are you saying grace over?
Yes. So two kind of major parts. One is that I work very closely with Susan in helping drive the strategic direction of the organization. So a lot of things I just talked about, talking to people, our internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. I'll be talking to elected officials and others about kind of what they see and let them know where we're going as an organization. And so a lot of my work would be outward facing. The other part is that I oversee the central functions that support our great schools. So things like finance, talent, fundraising, legal, those things would be under my purview in this role. And then I think all of that is fun. That's the kind of person I am, but a particularly fun part of that is really being able to hear from people what their hopes and dreams are and figuring out where and how we can actually operationalize those. Because there are a lot of great ideas out there, and my hope is that through my work, I can help build that into the strategy of the organization.
The stories are replete with pandemic recovery, be it kids getting back in and re-socializing, be it teachers trying to address the fatigue they feel already before even Thanksgiving, the test scores we've heard about. How do you foresee yourself engaging in those issues and trying to tackle some of those issues?
Yeah, and so recovery, of course, is an important part of the strategic direction of the organization. So what does that look like? I think our test scores, like many other places, were sobering for us, but we also expected them. We knew that we were coming out of very tough times and that they reflected it in our test scores. And so part of my work as president is making sure that we are keeping our strategic direction in the forefront as we navigate this recovery terrain. So a lot of what we saw, we expected. Our academic teams, which actually are under Susan's purview, not mine, already have plans in place for that. My job as president is making sure, one, that the rest of the organization is aligned on that and is helping to support that academic recovery. And then two, making sure people outside the organization also understand what we're doing, right? Because KIPP DC is such a large player in the charter sector in DC that people often want to know, what is KIPP DC doing? And so part of my work will be making sure that people understand at the level that's appropriate, that we have a plan, that we're ready, that we're prepared to do things like make sure we're improving attendance, make sure that we're focusing on instructional leadership, making sure that we have effective, consistent instruction and intervention. And I think if Susan were here, she would talk about consistency because really what the last couple 2.5 years have shown us is what happens when students don't have consistent learning experiences. So that'll be important for people to understand outside the organization, that is a priority for us. And part of my job as president is making sure, one, that people understand that, but two, that we're also setting up the conditions internally to facilitate that consistency.
Got it. Hey, we've got a question from some of our viewers, and I want to grab those right away because this is supposed to be very engaging. Just you and I talking, but Ahmad wants to know that during the listening sessions you've had so far, what are maybe the top 3 or so learnings or inputs you're taking away from it?
For those of you who are in schools or have been in schools, there's this sense historically that like March is the toughest month, right? Typically there are no holidays in March, right? The last holiday was President's Day in mid-February. Spring break feels forever away. And so everyone's just pushing through to get to March. The most common sentiment that we heard during these listening sessions so far is that it already feels like March. And so for people in schools, that's concerning to think about that people are already at the point where they feel burnt out. At this point, it would have been October, right? So how do we think about recruitment, retention, and sustainability to make sure that we have the people in place? Teachers, they're pushing to do their absolute best, even though things are seemingly harder than ever. I think all of our lives were changed during the pandemic. And in many ways, we still need people to show up the way they showed up before the pandemic. And they are feeling that. And we have to figure out how to adjust to that. So I would say that's one. The second, I think, is sustainability, people sustainability, organizational sustainability, all of those things. But people want to get through to June and be whole when they get to June. So how can we help support that? And then third, this came out a little bit in the listening sessions, but it's really coming out in my conversations with almost everyone who I talk to, whether they're in schools or not, and that's about safety. School safety, student safety. Across the district, something is happening. If you read the news, if you follow the mayor's press conferences, something is happening. And not a lot of that, from my understanding, is actually happening in schools, but it's happening around schools. And whatever happens out in our communities ends up affecting what's happening in the schools. And so it is very hard, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's very hard for us to be pushing on things like reading when getting to and from school is a legitimate concern for students and staff. And so those are things that we've certainly heard and are certainly working on to make sure that we're providing good learning opportunities for our students and good work opportunities for our staff.
You got a lot that you're taking in. Let me add to that. We just had an election. The dust hasn't settled nationally, but here in DC, it looks like it's starting to settle. You have a very external role. Any first impressions on how you want to tackle that? Make sure that the decisioners, if you will, know more about KIPP and what they need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spoke a little bit earlier about some of the perceptions I think that I had coming into this work about KIPP DC, and those didn't come from nowhere, right? They exist out in the ecosystem, and they certainly exist in the offices of our elected officials, newly elected and those who have been around for a long time. So I think one of the things that we will have to do as KIPP DC is make sure that key decision makers across the city actually understand us, not the KIPP DC they believe us to be, but the KIPP DC we actually are. we have to control the narrative of telling our stories in those spaces, because if we don't, others will, and others don't know. And I can say that as someone who was outside and didn't know. People don't know. And so as we look at what I think in many ways has been a favorable election for us as KIPP DC and for the charter sector as a whole, it is also very true that the gap between what decision makers need to know about KIPP DC and charters and what they actually know about KIPP DC and charters is way too wide for the types of decisions they're making. And a lot of the work that in particular the council does in an effort to be responsive to its stakeholders and to the public can often create administrative and other burdens for charter schools and for KIPP DC that just don't serve students. And so one thing I think we really have to help them understand is what the impact of their proposed legislation and their proposed policies will be on students. Because if we are, as an organization, having to reallocate resources from classroom teachers to respond to new data needs or to respond to new training requirements that we are already meeting in other and better ways, then it's just taking away from what we're actually here for. And so I think our work after any election, in particular this one where there are some real opportunities for us, is to make sure that people understand who we are and what we do.
Hey, given you're coming from the Charter Alliance, Shannon, and this external role, so obviously your primacy is KIPP DC, but there's also the burden of leadership that KIPP has as the largest player in the space. How do you foresee advocacy both for KIPP and for the entire sector and engagement with other charter schools to advance the sector's causes?
Yeah, one of the very few gifts that the pandemic gave us was an opportunity for charter leaders across the city to become peers and to really engage with each other and to collaborate. And I do think in that space, the KIPP DC team that pre-existed me did an amazing job of engaging with other leaders in a way that's like, we're all in this together. We can share information, we can problem solve, we can bring you the questions that we can't answer because maybe you have perspective and insight on that. And so I think that the ability for KIPP DC to be leaders in this space is already well established. And that changed some during the pandemic in tremendous ways. And so as we continue into recovery, I think there is an opportunity for us to continue that work, to make sure that we are engaging our other colleagues and peers across the city in meaningful ways. To give you a sense of numbers, I think the last I remember, KIPP DC is around 7,000 of the 45,000 students in charter schools in DC, to give you a sense of percentage. So we're not the majority, but we are by far the largest. And because of that reason, a lot of people look to us for guidance and support and just best practices. And I think the more that we can do that as we continue, the better. I think it helps us not only just in our own day-to-day work, because we have struggles and concerns that we may be able to learn from others from, but also the more that we can help make this sector cohere, the stronger this sector will be in places like the Wilson Building. The moment we start to fragment and we start as LEAs, as charter LEAs, to go against each other, the harder it will be for us in the places where decisions are made.
So you're in this new job. It's taken up a lot of your time because you want a stupendous impression. It potentially is 24/7, not trying to get too personal, but that's probably not sustainable. What do you do to unwind? Do you unwind? What do you do? If you do, what do you do?
I do.
You said earlier you were a nerd. I want to check the nerd factor.
Yes. Yes. So I would say if this were 20 years ago, I would say I don't need to unwind. I'm there all the time. It was when I was a guidance counselor, it was so bad that the custodial staff used to have to escort me out to my car at night because I was there so late and they were the only ones around. I have learned the importance of, I won't call it balance, but I have learned the importance of stepping away and unwinding from time to time for various reasons, including the fact that I have a dog who is 140 pounds, 140-pound Cane Corso, which is an Italian Mastiff. He looks terrifying, but he's not. But he is very demanding. And so in the moments that I may be sitting on the couch on my laptop, he has no qualms about coming over and closing my laptop. to let me know that it is his time, not work time. When Nero isn't controlling my life, I do like to read. I love to cook and experiment. I have been known to play a version of Top Chef or Chopped in my own kitchen just to see what I can whip up as my own challenge. I used to like to bowl, and I still have my bowling ball and bowling shoes. And so at some point, I might need to bring those back out just to get me out of the house a bit. And then earlier this year, I purchased a home that had not been renovated in at least 50 years. So there are projects all around to give me some time away from work in my own house.
So what do you do at Nero when you're at school? I asked partly because two of my kids, both of whom are in Chicago now, both have dogs, and their lives are a little bit more complicated when they have to travel. So does Nero go into doggy daycare? Does Nero have the run of the house? Or
well, as it turns out, 140-pound Italian Mastiff's primary activity is sleeping. He sleeps about 18 hours a day.
There you go.
So one of my goals is to try to align his sleeping schedule to my work schedule. And so I'm sure that right now he was on the couch enjoying his day. But when I do have to travel, he does go into a boarding place that takes very good care of him, where he's a superstar. So there is a network there.
Got you. Hey, we got another question
Sure.
from the audience. David, I guess he wants to follow up on your observations on the election, and in what ways do you think they were favorable to KIPP DC?
So, absolutely. So I think the race that had the most potential consequences for us was the at-large council race, where there were two people selected. And I think the two who were selected are ones who understand KIPP DC, who want to help KIPP DC. And as an example, when I was at the DC Alliance, Councilmember Bonds was the person who was willing to put forth housing incentives for educators as one of her priorities last term. So as I mentioned earlier, one thing that we're hearing a lot from teachers and others is just like the burnout. And we've been thinking about, how do we help teachers? How do we create incentives to get high quality teachers in the district? And one of the things that has continuously come up are housing and tax incentives. And Councilmember Bonds was willing to make that a priority when many others were not willing to step out there. And so I think moving forward into the next term, I think we have some real opportunity to continue to build on the work, particularly in educator incentives areas that has happened before. I think we're hearing from the mayor a sense that she wants to explore some new opportunities. She's now comfortably going to have a third term. And so I think there's some opportunity for her to take some risks and make some investments in education in ways that maybe she hasn't. Another thing that is not necessarily as clear from the election, but I do think is important, is you will also have a state superintendent of education who the mayor appoints, who has been a tremendous force in the city, and Dr. Christina Grant. And I think having a comfortable third term for Mayor Bowser with a state superintendent of education like Dr. Grant really increases the opportunities for all schools, and particularly charter schools, to be innovative and to be resourced in a way that allows for the type of growth and improvement that we're looking for.
So I'm sure you've heard that in politics, money is the mother's milk of elections. I think a variation of that is supporters are the mother's milk for education, nonprofits, and KIPP is no different. I think we're blessed that we've got a number of all sorts of supporters, those that donate, those that advocate for us, and the range. Do you have any particular message for them based on your first few weeks in the job?
Yeah, I would say probably three things. One is just to say thank you, right? I've been getting briefed on what the support network for KIPP DC looks like. And even having this event and having so many people show up just to hear me talk is tremendous and amazing. And I think that thank you for that. And thank you for your grace as we have been navigating through the pandemic and are now navigating in recovery. The second, I'll just put to the top of your radar. I've mentioned it earlier, but just want to mention it again, which is around safety. That is the biggest challenge, I think, right now across the city. And it's not just an education challenge. Everyone's trying to figure it out. So if you have ideas, if you have resources, if you have programs, recommendations, please reach out and let us know, because we are trying to do everything that we can to support our students and our staff and our city as it's navigating that difficult space. And then I think the third thing I would say is, just like I'm interested in learning and listening from our teachers, our students, our families, I'm interested in learning and listening with you. So if you please reach out. I'm happy to meet. I'm happy to join for drinks or dinner or lunch or whatever, to hear your ideas, your hopes, your dreams for KIPP DC. That type of partnership and thought partnership is particularly valuable to me as well. And so I certainly welcome that.
So Shannon, a sense was, at least I had, that you had some big pumps to fill when Allison
Yes.
left. She had a very positive impact, but it is clear listening to you, you're up for the challenge if you've not already equated it. We're excited. I know Susan is. She's made that abundantly clear. She's excited that you were on the team. It sounds like you've gotten a lot of useful insights that are going to help you in the leadership team with Susan and the rest of your peers push KIPP DC forward. So thank you for opening up yourself to us and this audience. We got a little bit better sense of what makes you tick and why you're motivated by it. And we're glad to have you on the team. And if I have to wear my board hat here, we're wishing you tons of success, because if you succeed, KIPP DC is going to continue to succeed. So thank you. Glad you're here.
Thanks so much, Barry. I really appreciate it.
Kristen or Tom, you guys want to take it back?
Yes, thank you so much, Barry. You are officially hired to be our new MC for engaging on the issues. Looking forward. And Shannon, thank you again for sharing your story, and super excited to have you part of our team. And thank you all to our attendees for joining us today. As we look ahead, just, if you have any ideas on how you want to get more involved, please email us at development@kippdc.org. And also just continue to look out at kippdc.org/get involved to learn more about how to be part of our KIPP DC community. And then lastly, I just wanted to put a plug that in January, we are hosting our annual Virtual Career Networking event. This is our opportunity where we connect our alumni with industry professionals. And so it's always exciting for them to get to meet people in industry fields that they are really curious and excited to pursue. So please look out for an invitation from us in the coming weeks. And then lastly, just want to highlight that we are going to pause engaging on the issues until January of 2023. As we know, we are embarking on holiday season. So just want to say thank you for joining us. Please look out for a follow-up email, and I'm wishing all of you a wonderful holiday season.